What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Photo Finish. Scot Radio's home for motorsports in general, and usually NASCAR in particular. We're going to start with the F1 race this weekend because Kimi Raikkonen won a Grand Prix for the first time in 113 races. Very exciting. I'm your host, Ben Schneider, and we're welcoming back this week Matt Cole after a week off. Matt, good to see you again.
Good to be back. I feel comfortable. I feel at home. Sorry I wasn't here last week, but I'm ready to dive right in.
Quite
an exciting list we have here to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll start with the brief news. So Williams F1 have signed Mercedes Jr. George Russell for 2019. Their second driver is still to be determined. They could keep Sergei Sirotkin, who brings a lot of money from Russia. Robert Kubica would be a great comeback story. I'm sure a lot of fans would find that very popular. But Esteban Ocon, who drives for Force India right now, is being shoved out because he doesn't bring really any funding or sponsorship. Even though he's obviously a very talented driver, he currently doesn't have a place on the grid for next year. So there are some talks that maybe Williams can figure something out. But Williams being a team right now that have a lot of history and are currently at the back of the grid, they could certainly use some sponsorship. And if Ocon can't bring that, then it's going to make it difficult to sign him.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unfortunate recurring theme we have here where we're talking about the fact that these racers that are good, these racers that can compete, are losing spots on teams because of sponsorships, and it's coming down to money, and it's being ruled by money, and that's tough to kind of swallow and look at.
Yeah, we're certainly living in an age where there are more paid drivers than ever because sponsorship and money is more important than ever. A little bit of news from Down Under this week in Australia. Supercars track had a bit of a NASCAR demo, and Scott McLaughlin, who's a V8 Supercars driver, says he was, quote, holding on for dear life during the opening NASCAR demo on the streets of the Gold Coast, and there's some talk that there could be an exhibition NASCAR race coming there, perhaps even as early as next year.
Do you think they're doing this for, like, to get exposure in Australia, maybe look for possible sponsorships involving?
Exposure is one thing. We've mentioned here a couple times fans have been asking for more road courses and perhaps even a street course, so this would answer the latter of those, and this isn't actually unprecedented. We had a couple of exhibition races in Japan in the 90s.
Okay.
But those were very popular. Those happened at Suzuka, where the F1 series races now. So it has happened in the past. We'll see if it happens again.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and also, if you've been following on Twitter, you'll know that Jimmie Johnson and Fernando Alonso have been teasing something. They've been filming a couple of scripted phone calls. They sent the second pair of tweets out this weekend, and from what I think, I'm 99.9% sure we're going to see a seat swap. It's just a matter of figuring the details out and when that's going to happen, but this is also not unprecedented. Jeff Gordon did it with Juan Pablo Montoya at Indianapolis in 2003, and actually 4 years later, Montoya came to race NASCAR full-time. Fernando Alonso's plans are up in the air. He won't be back in F1 next year, so that could lead to some interesting things for him. And Lewis Hamilton did it with Tony Stewart at Watkins Glen in 2011. So if you look at the pattern, 2003 to 2011 being 8 years, 2011 being 7 years ago, we're kind of due for another F1 NASCAR seat swap. And Jimmie Johnson and Fernando Alonso are two very good candidates for that.
That's awesome.
And they both mentioned wanting to drive other cars, get some exposure in what it feels like to be in another series. This would be a good opportunity for both of them to do that.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I didn't know a ton about that. That'd be an interesting seat switch to see there, seat swap. I'd look forward to that.
Yeah, they keep teasing it, and we keep waiting, and we're waiting for official confirmation that it's going to happen, and I'd be stunned if it's anything. If it's just like a sponsorship announcement, I'm going to be disappointed because they've showed clips of their cars. It's like two champions, two different cars. So we'll see what happens there. All right, let's get into the United States Grand Prix in America. Let me tell you, we got really lucky this year because this was, in my humble opinion, the best race of the season. We had action all throughout the race, but most importantly, a very, very popular winner in Kimi Raikkonen, his first victory in 113 Grands Prix. You have to go all the way back to 2013, the season opener in Australia. I was in 8th grade. That's how long it's been since Kimi Raikkonen won. He actually broke a record for the longest winless drought broken in Formula One history. Matt, what do you think of Kimi's performance?
I thought it was awesome. And, you know, we were talking about it, too, that he's gone through two engine changes, the regulations wise, in his first win.
That was one of many records the win broke. So Kimi's now the first driver to win in the V10 era, the V8 era, and the current V6 hybrid turbo engine era.
To be racing for as long as he has been, and under the circumstances that he's been racing, that just speaks to the athlete that he is. And again, that's another recurring theme we've been talking about, discussing, the athleticism, the fact that these racers are athletes. To be able to adjust to those regulations and those rule changes so smoothly it really is a testament to his ability to race.
So if you haven't heard it yet, this is David Croft from Sky Sports and the World Feed calling Kimi home to the win.
For the first time in 113 races, the checkered flag for him as a winner. Kimi Raikkonen wins the US Grand Prix and breaks the record for the longest gap between race wins. It is victory for Ferrari, it is victory for Kimi, and the strategy they got bang on this afternoon.
Did you catch that? He said 113-year races.
I didn't think he was that old.
Yeah, I didn't think Kimi was getting up there that much. But yeah, certainly a very, very exciting, very popular victory. So, as we mentioned, longest gap between race wins. Also, the longest gap between a driver's first career win and last career win. I don't want to say that officially because Kimi still has 3 more chances to win this year, and he'll be around with Sauber in 2019 and 2020, but without trying to disrespect them, I don't see Sauber, unless they have a major turnaround or change in events happen in the regulations, which they won't until 2021. He probably won't be winning any races for Sauber, I don't think. I guess we'll talk about Max Verstappen next. So Max Verstappen finished second for Red Bull. He started 18th on the grid after having a suspension failure in qualifying. So if Kimi hadn't nursed his tires home and drove as brilliantly as he did, Max was in position to maybe win from 18th on the grid, which also would have been an absolutely incredible story.
Yeah, and it's amazing that those two are the ones that finished in the top 2 there. I wasn't aware that he was 18th on the grid, and because I just saw him finish second, I didn't know that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, Max tends to be able to work his way through traffic very well. If you remember his drive in Brazil in 2016, where he had to pit to go back on the full wets because the inters weren't working, and he drove from 15th to 3rd in the closing laps, and it was one of the most stunning displays of driving, and he was only 19 at the time. So he's got a bright future indeed. So Lewis Hamilton came home 3rd, and I think if we're all honest, we all thought he was going to drive home to the win. After Daniel Ricciardo's engine failure, the virtual safety car was deployed, and Mercedes told Lewis to do the opposite of what Kimi did. So when Kimi stayed out, Kimi was in the lead at the time, Lewis saw him stay out, he pulled off into the pits. They went under the soft tires, and we all figured that's the hardest compound available for the end of the race, or for the race this weekend. He'll probably be able to go to the end of the race on that set of tires. And we got midway through, Lewis was leading, and the tires started to blister, and it quickly became apparent Ferrari actually got the strategy right, which is an absolute rarity. Ferrari are known for blowing it and bottling it and getting the strategy wrong all the time, but they nailed it this time. And with the fact that it was raining on Friday and not as much was known about the tires coming into the race as per usual, Lewis had to come in, and that left the door wide open for Kimi, and all he had to do at that point was hold off Max and Lewis, who granted was on fresher tires, but in traffic, couldn't get around them. So I still can't get over it. Kimi Raikkonen won a Grand Prix, finally breaking that winless drought. He also broke a tie with Mika Häkkinen on the all-time wins list, so he's now 15th, and he also holds the record for most wins by a Finnish driver. He and Mika Häkkinen both being from Finland. So that's another cool statistic for him. So the championship update, it was not clinched. It could have been clinched this weekend if Lewis had won the race, but he didn't. He finished 3rd. Sebastian Vettel finished 4th. He spun himself out again at the start of the race. Another mistake by the 4-time world champion. All for Red Bull, though, still looking for his first championship with Ferrari. And for it to come this year, at this point, he has to go out and win all of the 3 remaining races and hope that Lewis Hamilton finishes no better than 7th in any of them. So all Lewis has to do is go out and finish 7th in one of the 3 remaining races, or better, and he'll be crowned champion. Doesn't matter what Sebastian does.
That's pretty simple. As far as what we were talking about earlier, where it's almost like there's an A class and a B class.
Yeah, well, I'm sure F1 fans certainly know that the gap between Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull and the 4th place team, whoever that may be, it may end up being Renault, it may end up being Haas this year. There's a battle going on. Kevin Magnussen actually basically calls it the B class, or LMP2 class if you want to go the sports car route, because the gap between the top 3 and the rest of the field is, quite frankly, disgusting. I think that's one of Liberty's goals when they introduce the new regulations, is to figure out, okay, well, how can we let the smaller teams, how can we let the teams that aren't in the top 3, no matter what their budgets are, no matter what their size is, how can we make them close that gap a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, and with Lewis's ability to finish in the top 7, I think it's pretty much the
basically,
deal sealed.
Yeah. So Lewis can basically, if you ask me, probably go out. He can have an off day. Maybe his driving is a little bit subpar by his standards. Just throughout the whole weekend, he's not hitting his marks. Maybe his crew botches a pit stop as well to add insult to injury. He probably still finishes 6th.
Yeah.
Because and the speed differential is so great that, I mean, we saw this actually as Vettel was working his way back up through the field. The teams that were fighting in the midfield for their positions, they were basically just letting him through.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later he's going to pass you anyway. There's no sense in getting caught up in a battle that
you're going to lose.
You can't win.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who's driving the cars. If they're competent F1 drivers, the Ferrari's going to beat out the Williams or the McLaren or the Force India every single time.
Yes.
So there's no point in fighting a battle you can't win. So driving up through the field, overtaking all those cars, not to make what Max Verstappen did sound any less impressive, but it was basically a given that he was going to get back up to at least a top 6 finish even before the race began. All right, so let's move on to a little bit of NASCAR action and ARCA action, the last hashtag ARCANightInAmerica, as Twitter would call it. So those 3 series were in Kansas this weekend, the Xfinity Series, Cup Series, and the ARCA Series. I guess we'll start with ARCA. I was going to start with NASCAR here on my rundown, but ARCA happened first, so I guess we'll talk about it first. So Sheldon Creed ended up winning the championship and the race. He actually had to recover from some crash damage early on, but a great season for him coming to a close, and the guy who grew up on Stadium Super Trucks racing those for many years is now an ARCA Series champion.
That's awesome. Yeah, and again, I don't know a ton about the ARCA Series, so just kind of briefly looking through it, seeing where he finished, seeing how he raced, seeing the praise that he received. He seems like a fan favorite. He seems like a guy that you would pull for. So. Like I said, I don't know a ton about the ARCA Series, but from what I've seen, I like this kid. I like Sheldon Creed.
So his stats for this season look like this: 4 wins, 16 top 5s, 18 top 10s in 20 races. So a very impressive year for Sheldon Creed and a very well-deserved championship. So it didn't look like anybody was going to catch Drew Herring for most of the race. Drew Herring was a Gibbs development driver and still under contract with them. He was coming back to do a one-off ARCA race. He ended up in the lead, leading a bunch of laps and battling with his teammate Riley Herbst and Venturini Motorsports' Michael Self, and ended up getting caught in a wreck, and that kind of set him back for a night. If I recall correctly, I think he finished in 8th.
I believe so.
So a little disappointing for him. And Natalie Decker, who is the young female driver for Venturini Motorsports, came home in 6th, actually led her first lap. She actually recovered from a spin as well. A lot of incidents in this race, but that's not too unexpected for an ARCA Series race, I suppose. But if I were to recap Natalie's season, I think I would probably say it wasn't great, it wasn't terrible. Like, if you're driving a Venturini Motorsports car, is 2 top 5s and 9 top 10s in 20 races a little bit underwhelming? Absolutely. But is the fact that she only had 1 DNF and kept her car clean, brought it home? Most of the time, that 1 DNF was at Talladega, by the way, so not much you can do a lot of times for those restrictor plate races getting caught up in wrecks. But Is it a good thing that she knows how to keep the car clean?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think personally, Matt, you can maybe chime in on this as well.
Sure.
She deserves at least one more year in ARCA. I think that's pretty clear. She grew up racing a bunch of short tracks, so these bigger asphalt tracks were a little bit new to her. But if she can't turn it around next season, assuming she's back with Venturini and has a car that's capable of going out and competing for wins and maybe even a championship, she's probably done.
Yeah. Yeah, first I wanted to say you were right. Herring did finish 8th. I had to pull that up. Yeah, if she's racing for Venturini again next year, there needs to be some improvements made. And like you said, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It was mediocre. It can't be mediocre. And, you know, as harsh as that kind of sounds, that's the truth.
Well, she finished 7th in points, but the caveat to that is there were only 7 drivers who ran all 20 races this year.
Okay, yeah.
The guys coming in right behind her, Joe Graff Jr. only missed the season opener at Daytona. And Brad Smith drives for very small James Hilton Motorsports. Looks like he had one race where he was listed as a DNS where he did not start. I think it was at Charlotte. And he also withdrew at Salem. So he was entered originally in every race, but he didn't end up starting every race. So we can't credit him for having participated in all 20 races this year. So, yeah, only 7 drivers, and she was the last of them in the point standings.
That's unfortunate, to say the least. And I think because this was such a mediocre year and she can't afford mediocrity, it's going to add that much pressure if she does come back next year and race in the ARCA Series.
Yeah, I remember keeping track online with the race at Lucas Oil Raceway, and at one point the Venturini cars were running in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 15th. And she was the one in 15th. So when your teammates are up there battling for the lead, battling for a top 3 or a top 5, you really don't have an excuse not to be right up there with them.
No, you don't. You don't have a leg to stand on. You're right.
Yeah, if you're in a Venturini car, you should be solidly in the top 10 more often than not. So for her to only get 9 top 10s was a bit of a downer. But who knows? She could turn it around next year, and I'm certainly rooting for her. I know a lot of people are. But again, it doesn't matter what sponsorship you have, or if you're a man or a woman or whatever. You know, if you don't go out and get the results, eventually you're going to stall out, especially if you're in that development stage where she is. All right, so moving on to the Xfinity race at Kansas. Now, this race got off to a crazy start, we should say. A big wreck at the start of the race, taking out several playoff contenders. And that opened the door for Daniel Hemrick, who started up front. Said before the race he had probably the best car he had all season, really felt confident about his chance to win. He led most of the way, but it was John Hunter Nemechek for Chip Ganassi's team that passed him late in the running to score his first career Xfinity win. Hemrick still looking for his. So John Hunter Nemechek getting a much-needed win. He got a lot of hate thrown his way, I guess we should say, on social media when Ross Chastain went out and won in his second start in the 42. Nemechek's been in that car more often than not this season. So for him to have not won a race yet was adding a little bit of pressure to him. Some fans were saying Chastain's obviously the better driver if he can go out his second start and perform like that. Nemechek can't get a win. Well, he's gotten that win now.
Yeah, I think that's great for him, and that's great for his his standing within the team, within the community. I'm glad that he won. I'm glad that he won, and he is talented. So the fact that he was getting so much flack and there was such an issue here, it's good that he kind of came back and proved everyone wrong. There's justice in that. So I'm pulling for you, Nemechek.
Yep, and also a good day for the underdogs. Ryan Sieg in particular, the number 39. His family-owned team ran up front, flirting with the top 10 most of the day, ended up finishing 9th, and NBC basically ignored them the entire race. There was virtually no mention of them whatsoever throughout the whole broadcast.
No, all the focus is on the playoffs and the playoff drivers.
Yeah, and so Sieg's team actually called the NASCAR and NBC Twitter account out saying, quote, calling out at NASCAR and NBC for some awful coverage of our team and many others today. Lots of good finishes for small teams and not even a mention. Not good for sponsors. But good thing they interviewed at Cole Custer post-race for his gutsy effort with no power steering in 26th.
Yeah.
Custer's a playoff driver.
Mm-hmm.
in case you couldn't figure that out.
It's unfortunate to see that he wasn't covered at all. There was nothing. There was no mention of him.
Yeah. And it's part of what this whole playoff narrative pushes is that, well, these are basically the only drivers we're going to cover or devote 90% of our coverage to as the season comes to a close.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got guys like the underdog, that's got no recognition. He raced wonderfully. You know, he finished in a good spot. And now he's just been hung out to dry. So, I mean, some people might say that the tweet is childish or whatever, but
it has 1.9 million. Wow, 1.9 thousand. Yeah, Sieg's team isn't that big and following. 1.9 thousand likes right now on Twitter.
That's
so
awesome.
A lot of fans agreeing with that, and I don't think NBC has given a response. But Lombard Bros Gaming, who sponsor Ryan Sieg for a few races this year, they replied, "We kept waiting to hear something. Fortunately, your sponsors and Dan's know how awesome you are."
Yes.
So it is unfortunate.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is that these small teams that are looking for small sponsors, looking for big sponsors eventually to improve their teams and start running up front, well, how are they supposed to get those sponsors if they're not getting any media attention? Because if you don't get media attention, the sponsors don't get any attention.
Yep.
And when the sponsors don't get any attention, it makes sponsoring car look not very attractive.
No, you're
because
right.
You're not putting your name out there to potential new customers and new fans.
Yeah. He's kind of stuck in this stalemate, really. Like you said, that whole situation. It's good that he's getting praise, you know, from his sponsors and stuff, but it's not on any level of, you know, probably where he'd want to be, obviously.
Yeah.
And kind of running the gamut and trying to get a big sponsor. It's impossible. You can't be done.
And NASCAR fans are very loyal to their sponsors. I don't think sponsoring cars is as attractive as it was in the 90s and 2000s when the sport was doing a little better. But, you know, Jeff Gordon fans would drink Pepsi instead of Coke. You know, Jimmie Johnson fans would shop at Lowe's instead of Home Depot. Conversely, Tony Stewart fans would shop at Home Depot instead of Lowe's.
Yeah.
So if you have a driver and that driver has a sponsor, you want to support that sponsor to show your thanks and recognition for them taking care of your team and your driver.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the Cup race. So Chase Elliott ended up taking his third win in the last 8 races. He's won at Watkins Glen, Dover, and now Kansas. And with that, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, and Alex Bowman were eliminated from the playoffs as the round of 12 comes to a close. So, Matt, what's your reaction to that? Brad Keselowski was on a tear. He won 3 races in a row.
I know. He was performing so well. And I loved Larson, too. Just from seeing his race a couple weeks back at the Roval, that's where I kind of started to get interested in him and you know, just his attitude, how he held himself. So it's sad to see these guys go, man. It's sad. And like you said, Keselowski was on a tear there. To see his name, you know, out of the running for the playoffs is shocking, to say the least, really. So yeah, as far as Keselowski and Larson, you know, Blaney and Bowman, I respect them too, but my
of
heart
course,
sank.
Blaney ended up winning the Roval after the Truex
Yeah.
Johnson collision at the end of the race. Yeah,
Exactly. I mean, my heart goes out to Keselowski and Larson in particular, but to all the 4 guys, they all seem to have great seasons, and something to build upon moving into next year.
So as it stands, it's Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex Jr., the big 3. No surprise there. Elliott, obviously, and then Clint Bowyer, Joey Logano, Kurt Busch, and Eric Almirola are the 8 drivers remaining in the playoffs with 4 races left. All 4 Stewart-Haas cars in the round of 8. What a story it would be if all 4 of them made the championship 4 at Homestead.
I know.
Tony Stewart, Gene Haas would be guaranteed a Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series championship.
Wow. So there's a lot on the line here, but not in a negative way. They have a pretty good chance here of taking home a victory.
Yeah, and I would say, as does Chase Elliott. You know, Hendrick were down on speed all year, and now all of a sudden Chase Elliott's won 2 of the last 3 races here. Should he be considered a championship favorite at this point?
I think so. It's all about, you know, timing. When you're clicking, when you start to emerge victorious, and that's what he seems to be doing. You know, you think about it in context of any other sport. What happens during the season, will dictate where you end up, who you're competing against. But there are playoff teams, and I think that Chase Elliott's a playoff driver. So
Yeah.
I would totally expect that he would have a strong chance at winning the Cup Series.
Yeah, I apologize. I misspoke. It's 3 of the last 11 races that
Okay.
Chase Elliott's won. Watkins Glen seems a little too recent to be that long ago at this
Yes.
point. It's crazy how fast the season's been going on. Yeah, but that's going to be it for this episode of The Photo Finish. Coming up next, Robert Gonzalez and Matt Lewis bring you all things Marvel and DC on the Comic Collision, so make sure you stay tuned for that. For now, I'm Ben Schneider alongside Matt Cole, and we will see you next week.
Go Sox.